"Someone get the truck driver a coffee while the adults finish talking." That's what he said. Not under his breath, not pulled aside in a quiet corner. He delivered it directly into a live microphone, measured, deliberate, timed with surgical precision for both the room and the cameras. 3 of them, mounted high in the boardroom corners, broadcasting the entire leadership transition of Black Ridge Industrial Group to investors, legal archives, and everyone with access to the internal feed. My hand was still extended when the words left his mouth. I had stepped forward to greet the incoming CEO. Polished table. Glass walls framing the Chicago skyline. The kind of room engineered to radiate authority. In my left hand, I held a bouquet, white lilies and eucalyptus, ordered under my name at their specific request for presentation optics. He didn't look at my face first. His eyes dropped to my boots, drifted to the flowers, and then he made up his mind. 2 seconds. That was all it took. My name is Talia Ward. I'm 52 years old, managing partner at Northwest Capital, a private investment firm that doesn't show up to meetings like this unless the numbers justify it. And the numbers that morning justified everything: $2.1 billion in committed capital. What I'm about to tell you is how 11 words, spoken into a hot mic in a Chicago boardroom, cost a chairman his position, his reputation, and every dollar of that commitment, all before lunch. You need to understand why I was in that room at all. Black Ridge had been on our radar for nearly a year. A mid-sized industrial conglomerate, logistics, manufacturing, distribution, solid infrastructure on paper, the kind of company that should have been quietly generating profit. Instead, it was hemorrhaging. Bad acquisitions, fractured integration, leadership that treated expansion as a headline strategy rather than an operational discipline. By the time they came to us, they didn't just need capital. They needed correction. We were prepared to deliver both. They simply didn't understand who they were dealing with. At Northwest Capital, my role carries no ceremonial weight. I don't attend meetings to sit quietly and observe. I sign. I approve. And when necessary, I walk away. As managing partner, I hold final authority over capital deployment, particularly in transactions where our position carries structural consequence. This one did. The $2.1 billion wasn't just another line in a funding package. It was the foundation the entire deal rested on. We were the lead investor, the anchor tranche. Without our participation, the rest of the capital stack would collapse. Multiple institutional partners had already made clear they would only proceed if we did. That morning, I wasn't there as a guest. 2 years before Black Ridge, I made a decision that stayed with me far longer than any financial return ever could. A $600 million investment into a regional infrastructure firm, strong numbers, clean projections, a chairman whose reputation checked every box on paper. I didn't attend the final meeting. I delegated it to my second-in-command, signed off remotely, and trusted the process. 3 days before closing, a video surfaced. It didn't leak quietly. It spread fast, shared internally first, then picked up externally within hours. The chairman stood on a stage during a company town hall, pointing at a line worker in the front row. He called him replaceable. Then he laughed. Not nervous laughter, not a misjudged attempt at humor. The kind of laugh that assumes the room belongs to you. Some people in the audience laughed along. We saw the clip. We discussed it. Legal said it wasn't material to the deal. PR said the news cycle would move on. The board issued a statement about context and misinterpretation, and I let the transaction proceed. What followed was an immediate collapse. It was slower than that, and in some ways far worse. Regulatory scrutiny intensified. Labor disputes escalated. Internal morale eroded in ways no spreadsheet could measure. And every time our firm's name surfaced, it was attached to a company that treated people as disposable components. We recovered our return eventually. But it cost time, attention, and something harder to quantify: credibility. After that, I changed how I operated. I stopped believing that numbers alone could tell the complete story of an organization. I began paying close attention to tone, to behavior, to the small moments most people dismiss. And I added something to every deal going forward. We called it the respect clause. It wasn't complicated. If any senior leadership engaged in behavior during negotiations or closing that could damage the company's reputation, documented, observable conduct, we reserved the right to withdraw our capital immediately. No penalties. No delays. Most people signed it without a second thought. They never imagine it will apply to them. The morning of the meeting, I flew into Chicago earlier than necessary. Not because of scheduling, but because I don't like arriving rushed into rooms where decisions carry real weight. I changed in the airport lounge, swapped the tailored suit I'd worn on the flight for something more practical, and took a car downtown to Black Ridge's headquarters. Glass tower. Polished lobby. A stock ticker scrolling quietly along the wall. The kind of place designed to signal stability, even when the underlying numbers tell a different story. At reception, I gave my name. The woman behind the desk smiled, then hesitated just a fraction of a second too long before typing it in. Subtle, but I've learned to notice those pauses. They usually mean something hasn't matched expectations. A few minutes later, someone from investor relations came down to escort me, young, composed, polished in the way people are when they've been told a meeting matters. He asked about my flight. I asked about the room upstairs. He said people were optimistic. The elevator ride was quiet. When the doors opened, the atmosphere shifted. Softer carpet, lower voices, walls lined with framed photographs of past leadership milestones, ribbon cuttings, expansion announcements, handshakes frozen in time. We stopped outside a set of glass doors. Above them, cameras were already mounted, red indicator lights still dark for the moment. Full transparency today, he said, almost as though he were offering reassurance. Inside, the boardroom was exactly as expected. Long table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows over the city, screens preloaded with presentation decks. On a side table sat a floral arrangement, white lilies and eucalyptus, ordered under my name. He handed it to me when I pointed it out. They thought it would help set the tone, he said quietly. I carried it in myself. Most people were already seated. Conversations paused just long enough to acknowledge someone entering, then resumed. Nobody stood. Nobody asked who I was. That was fine. I wasn't there to be introduced. I took a few steps into the room, still holding the flowers, and felt the shift almost immediately, not in words, but in posture. The way people glanced at me and then past me. The way their attention returned to conversations that didn't include me. No nameplate waited at the table. No one paused to ask who I was. They saw exactly what they expected to see, work boots instead of heels, no visible marker of hierarchy, a woman carrying flowers into a room already arranged for optics. In their world, that combination meant one thing: support staff. I've been in enough rooms like this to recognize the pattern. It happens fast. People categorize you before you say a word. They assign your level, your relevance, your place, all from fragments. And once the judgment is made, it rarely gets revisited. At the head of the table sat Victor Langford, chairman of Black Ridge. Early 60s, composed, the kind of presence built from decades of being heard without interruption. He noticed the flowers before he noticed me. Set those over there, he said, gesturing toward the sideboard without breaking his conversation. I didn't move. I'll hold on to them, I replied, calmly. He gave me a brief look, the kind reserved for people who don't immediately comply, not hostile, just dismissive. Then he turned back to his discussion as though the matter had already been resolved. Around the table, no one corrected the assumption. No one said my name. No one thought to. I moved along the edge of the table, reading faces, noticing who avoided eye contact and who didn't bother looking at all. At the far side sat the incoming CEO, Daniel Reeves, flipping through a printed agenda as if it offered him somewhere to focus. I stopped near him, set the flowers within reach, and freed my hand. Then I extended it. Welcome to Black Ridge, I said. I'm Talia. He looked up barely. His eyes flicked from my hand to my face, then moved past me toward the head of the table before he could respond. Victor Langford shifted in his chair. Not a large movement, just enough to redirect the room's attention. He leaned slightly toward the lapel microphone clipped to his jacket, the one feeding directly into the live stream, and then he smiled. Not at me. At the room. "Someone get the truck driver a coffee," he said, voice steady, perfectly projected. While the adults finished talking. The words landed exactly as he intended them to, clear, public, final. There was a beat, less than a second, where the room decided how to respond. A director to his right laughed first, too quickly. The kind of laugh that comes from instinct rather than genuine amusement. Another followed, softer, more uncertain. Across the table, someone coughed to cover their reaction. One of the communications staff dropped his gaze immediately, already aware of how that sentence would sound outside this room. The cameras kept rolling. I didn't withdraw my hand right away. I let it remain there, suspended long enough for the silence beneath the laughter to settle, long enough for anyone who wanted to step in, to redirect or correct, to have that opportunity. Nobody did. Daniel looked down at his papers, suddenly absorbed by something that wasn't happening in front of him. He didn't reach for my hand. Didn't acknowledge it. That told me everything I needed to know. Victor's eyes finally found mine, measuring, checking whether I understood what he had just established, whether I would absorb it quietly. I lowered my hand on my own terms. No rush. No visible reaction. Just a small, deliberate motion, like closing a door. Then I picked up the flowers, walked past the empty chairs, and took the seat at the far end of the table. No nameplate there either. That was fine. It suited the role they had already assigned me. Conversations attempted to resume. Voices lifted briefly, then settled back, slightly more compressed than before. Someone rearranged papers. Someone else reached for water they didn't drink. Victor turned to face the front of the room, as though nothing of consequence had just occurred. "Let's begin," he said. And, just like that, the meeting moved forward, as though the ground beneath it hadn't already shifted. The first slide appeared on the screen: transition plan, projected timelines. Victor spoke with the ease of someone who had done this 100 times, smooth, confident, already carrying the room forward as though nothing had disturbed the rhythm. I let him get through the opening lines. Then I spoke. "Before you continue," I said, not raising my voice, just placing it where it couldn't be overlooked, "there's something this room needs to be clear about." The words cut cleanly across the table. Conversation stopped without being told to. Victor turned, irritation flickering across his face for a fraction of a second before settling into something more controlled. "We're not taking input from staff during the session," he replied, the edge of a smile still visible. "If you have something, leave it with investor relations afterward." I met his gaze. "If you're not willing to acknowledge the person sitting across from you," I said, "then by tomorrow morning, $2.1 billion will no longer be part of this deal." The silence that followed wasn't the kind born of confusion. It was the kind that comes from calculation. Someone shifted in their chair. A pen stopped mid-note. Eyes moved not toward me, but toward Victor, waiting for him to reassert control. A director let out a short laugh, too loud and too forced. "Let's keep things professional," he said, as if labeling the moment could contain it. Victor leaned back slightly, studying me now with considerably more attention than before. "That's quite a statement," he said. "Capital is already secured." "I am the capital," I replied. The words didn't echo. They settled. Across the table, the CFO straightened, his expression tightening as something clicked into alignment with what I'd just said. The room was beginning to understand, not all at once, but enough. Victor's expression didn't change dramatically, but his certainty did. For the first time since I'd entered that room, he wasn't entirely sure where I stood. The CFO was the first to break the silence. "We'll need direct confirmation from the capital provider," he said carefully, weighing each word. Legal documentation alone won't be sufficient. It requires authorized release. Victor's eyes moved back to me slower this time. You're saying you control the funds? Not dismissive anymore. Not amused. Just verifying. I'm the managing partner of Northrust Capital, I said. Authorized to release the full commitment. How much? Someone asked from midway down the table, as though the figure might have changed. All of it, I answered. The words carried differently now. The lead independent director leaned forward, flipping open the folder in front of him. Pages turned. Eyes scanned. The clause was there, clear, direct, unmistakable. Reputational conduct. Immediate withdrawal rights. No penalty. I remember this, he said quietly. It was revised during the second negotiation round, I said, at my request. Victor exhaled, a short breath that didn't quite conceal the shift in his posture. You were concerned about optics, he said, trying to reframe it as something manageable. I was concerned about behavior, I replied. That landed harder than anything else so far. Around the room, attention turned away from the screens and toward each other, toward risk, toward implication. The incoming CEO finally looked up. Really looked this time. His expression no longer distant. What qualifies as documented conduct? He asked. The director didn't hesitate. Impact, not intent, he said, reading directly from the clause. If the behavior can materially affect reputation and it's recorded or witnessed, the provision applies. A quiet realization moved through the room. The cameras were still running. And suddenly everyone understood exactly what had already been captured. The meeting didn't collapse immediately. That's not how rooms like this operate. People continue out of habit, out of denial, out of the quiet hope that if they keep talking long enough, the consequences won't fully materialize. Victor straightened, adjusted his jacket, and turned back to the screen. Let's proceed, he said, voice steady again. We can address any concerns after the presentation. Slides advanced. Forecasts appeared, revenue curves, operational restructuring timelines, projected recovery points, all resting on a foundation that was already crumbling. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. About 10 minutes later, the CFO cleared his throat. Not loudly, just enough to interrupt the rhythm Victor was working to reestablish. There is one item we need to formally acknowledge before capital release, he said, fingers resting on the document in front of him. Victor didn't look at him. We've covered everything. The conduct provision, the CFO continued. That got attention. Pages turned again. Chairs shifted. The independent director leaned in, reading the clause more carefully this time. The language was exact. No ambiguity. No room to negotiate once triggered. Victor's patience thinned. This is standard language. It's not relevant here. It becomes relevant if the threshold is met, the director replied. And who decides that? Victor asked. I do, I said. He turned to face me fully now. No trace of dismissal remained. You're suggesting this meeting meets that threshold? I'm stating that the condition has already been met, I answered. There was a pause. Then the room began to fracture, not visibly, but internally. Phones appeared beneath the table. Messages went out quietly. Legal teams were contacted without announcement. The kind of silent coordination that happens when people recognize the outcome is no longer theoretical. Victor stood. We'll take a short recess, he said, his voice firm enough to imply control. Chairs moved quickly. People stepped out in clusters, speaking in low tones, already recalculating positions. I stayed seated for a moment. Then I stood, walked into the hallway, and pulled out my phone. One call. That was all it took. Reed picked up on the second ring. Execute the withdrawal, I said. Full amount, effective immediately. A brief pause, not doubt, confirmation. All of it, he asked. All of it, I replied. Reason code, conduct during negotiations. Documentation is live. Understood. The line went dead. I stood in the hallway for a moment, steady, composed. Not because it was easy, but because it had been decided long before I made the call. When I walked back into the boardroom, everything looked the same on the surface. Same polished table, same projections glowing on the screen, same people maintaining the pretense that the structure still held. Victor glanced at me and forced calm back into his expression. "Let's continue," he said. The presentation resumed, but the foundation was gone. The first phone buzzed. Then another. Then a cascade, notifications lighting up across the table like a silent alarm no one could dismiss. The CFO checked his screen and froze. "The lead tranche," he said slowly, his voice flattening. "It's been withdrawn." The room didn't erupt. It tightened. "Withdrawn? How?" Victor asked, his tone sharpening. "Executed," the CFO replied. "Confirmed. Full amount. $2.1 billion. That's when the shift became visible. One director leaned back, staring at nothing. Another was already typing rapidly, likely reaching out to legal. Someone else rose halfway from their chair, then sat back down, unsure what action could possibly matter anymore. Victor turned to me. "All performance gone. You'll reverse this," he said. Quieter now, but heavier. I held his gaze. "There's nothing to reverse." This time, no one attempted to interrupt, because everyone understood. Within minutes, the board moved. Not emotionally, but procedurally. Emergency session. Governance clauses invoked. Legal language replacing confidence. Motions raised, seconded, passed. Victor Langford was no longer in control of the room. Within the hour, he was placed on immediate administrative leave, pending internal investigation, his authority stripped in real time, in the very room where he had chosen to perform. Around him, the leadership team unraveled, not loudly, but unmistakably. Calls overlapped. Voices dropped into urgent whispers. The incoming CEO sat in silence, staring at a deal that no longer existed. The board wasn't discussing growth anymore. They were managing damage. Because the reality was simple, Black Ridge hadn't just lost funding. They had lost their lifeline. The $2.1 billion wasn't optional capital. It was survival. Without it, restructuring stalled. Partners hesitated. And the market would react before the day was over. Opportunity doesn't pause for recovery. It moves on. I stood, adjusted my coat, and walked out without waiting for acknowledgement. No one stopped me. By the time I reached the elevator, the outcome was already sealed, not by contracts, but by a moment. As the doors closed, I thought about how quickly everything unravels when respect is treated as an afterthought. And as I left the building, only one thought remained worth holding on to. Respect isn't something you offer once the deal is done. It's the price of entry to the conversation. I walked away from $2.1 billion, not because I could afford to absorb the loss, but because I couldn't afford to overlook what that room had revealed. I was reminded that respect isn't a gesture. It's a standard. The way people treat others when they believe it carries no consequence, that is who they truly are. And I've learned that no deal, no opportunity, no sum of money is worth compromising that.